Do you want to know how to retain and then safely delete all the content that you have stored in your Microsoft 365 tenant? Well, stay tuned for more SC 401 exam study guide goodness with data lifecycle management in Purview, retention policies, and retention labels. It's coming right up. Retention policies and retention labels are key to Microsoft Purview's data lifecycle management strategy. They're going to help you to comply with legal and regulatory requirements, reduce risk by deleting unnecessary data, preserve important content for a defined period, and retention applies to emails, documents, Teams messages, and more. So a little planning tip for you: before creating any policies, map retention requirements to business needs and compliance obligations. Decide which data must be retained, for how long, and what should be disposed of. Now, let's take a look at retention labels and retention policies being practically implemented in our demo. Let's start by creating a retention policy. To do this, we need to be in the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. We need to go to Solutions, to Data Lifecycle Management, and into Policies and Retention Policies. Here we can create a new retention policy. We can give it a useful name. I will call this one New Retention Policy, as it is only for a demo. Always put in a meaningful description. I will leave that blank in the purposes of this demo and click on Next. You can choose to use admin units if you wish here. I will skip and go to Next. And you can choose the type of retention policy that you want to create here. You can go for adaptive, and this consists of attribute-based policies, for example, defined by department or site URL. And these are going to define the users, groups, or sites in your organization. You'll choose supported locations containing the content you want to retain, and the policy will automatically update to match criteria defined in the scopes. Or you can choose static, where you'll choose locations containing the content you want to retain, and if the locations change after this policy is created, for example, if a SharePoint site is added or removed, you'll need to manually update the policy. I'll choose static in this example. Next, we need to choose where to apply this policy, and we can choose the locations that we want the policy to apply to. And there are quite a few for us to choose from here. We can choose Exchange mailboxes, SharePoint Classic and Communications sites, OneDrive accounts, Microsoft 365 group mailboxes and sites. We can still to this day choose Skype for Business, Exchange public folders, Teams channel messages, chats, and private channel messages, Yammer community messages, even though that should be called Viva Engage now. And we can choose Copilot experiences, enterprise AI apps, and other AI apps as well. So do know your use cases, know what you need to protect for retention, and do be aware of some gotchas as well. For example, if you choose Teams channel messages, you will note that all the other policies above automatically went to the off position. This is because Teams channel messages cannot coexist with the policies mentioned earlier. So if we put on OneDrive again there, you will see Teams channel messages goes off. We can have Teams channel messages and we can have Teams chats together on their own policy. If we select Teams private channel messages, however, this one cannot coexist with the other Teams options. So do familiarize yourself with which of these toggles can be applied and how many policies you are going to need. This is definitely an exam question that has cropped up in the past on the old SC 400 exam. I'd be very surprised if it doesn't crop up on the SC 401 as well. So do be aware of how many policies you're going to need if you want Teams private channel messages included, Teams chat and channels, and all of these above as well. For this example, I will just take a couple of these. I will go for the top three, the SharePoint, the OneDrive, and the Exchange mailboxes, and I will click Next. Here on the next screen, you have your retention settings, and you can choose to retain items for a specific period, and you can drop down and select between 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, or a custom setting that you can put in yourself. I will set this one to 5 years. You can then start the retention period based on a few choices here, which are when the items were created or when the items were last modified. I will leave this one as when the items were created. Next, we have some options of what can be done at the end of the retention period. We can delete items automatically, do nothing. I will delete items automatically in this case, or you can change this selection altogether and simply choose retain items forever, and that does what it says on the tin. Even if users delete them, these items will be retained and be available for recovery techniques. Do be careful of this, though. I would caution any organization making this selection very, very dangerous. You should only ever retain content that you have for the appropriate amount of time based on regulations and industry standards. And the final option here is to only delete items when they reach a certain age. So this is a different sort of philosophy. This is almost the reverse of the top one. So items won't be retained, but when they reach the age you choose, they'll be deleted from where they are stored. And again, you can choose the period of years and delete content based on when it was created or when the items were last modified. I'll go back to the more usual selections of retaining for a specific period, and I will select next, and then I can complete this and click on finish after reviewing and making sure that I am happy with my selections. We do get a note here telling me that items that are currently older than 5 years will be deleted after you turn on the policy. This is especially important to note for locations scoped to all sources, for example, all Teams chats, although we didn't select that on this occasion, because all matching items in those locations across your organization will permanently be deleted. So just do be aware of that. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and create this one because I don't need another retention policy in my demo tenant, so I'm just going to go ahead and cancel there. So now we know how to create a retention policy. Let's go and look at creating a retention label. Now, we're in the policies here. We've created a retention policy. We'll come back to these two topics underneath shortly, but first we must look at retention labels. Now, how do these differ from retention policies? Well, you will note that when we created a retention policy, that we applied the policy to top level, container level, if you like, content. So SharePoint sites, Exchange mailboxes, etc., etc. Here, with labels, we are going to apply labels to items. So these are applied when you need exceptions to your retention policies. And these exceptions could include extending the retention period for specific documents or preventing certain emails from being permanently deleted, for example. So if you need even more label options, you can use records management to use file plan labels to manage your content. So here we go. This is the list of labels that I have, and they are very, very straightforward to set up. We go ahead and we can create a label. We can give it a name, and we can, just as an example, put in exactly what this is going to do, override retention policy. You would come up with something better than this, obviously, though. Put in a description for the users and a description for the admins. Put in something meaningful there that, as an admin, you're going to be able to understand. Click on next, and then for the labels, you can choose from these options here. You can retain the items forever or for a specific period. You can enforce actions after a specific period, or you can just label the items. And if you click next on each of these, you should see different options. So here, if we proceed with the first option, we can do similar to what the retention policies did. We can retain items for 7 years, or other selections there. Forever is there also, which is dangerous. I just accidentally clicked on create a new event type there, which we'll come back to. And then we can start the retention period based on when the items were created, when they were modified, when items were labeled. So note the term items. So that's important. Items applies to retention labels, whereas containers apply to retention policies. So Here we've got an example of an event type as well, which has to be created, and so on and so forth. So you can create new event types for what is called event-based retention, and you can enter a name and a description of what your particular event is going to be. And as you see here from some of the ones I created earlier, we've got things like expiration or termination of contracts and agreements, event type, product lifetime, etc., etc. So have a little read up of those on the microsoftlearn.com documentation to get yourself a good understanding of those. So we can click next from here, and then we can choose what happens after that retention period. We can delete items automatically, or we can start a disposition review. So what happens here is reviewers, known as disposition reviewers, are assigned in the next step to decide if items can safely be deleted or whether other actions, such as changing the retention period, should be taken. You can actually change the label yourself. So if you hit on that one, you can choose a replacement label. If we actually go back and start the disposition review, you can actually create the stages and assign those disposition reviewers there. And there are a few stages you can go through. It can consist of 1 to 5 stages. So do look into that and familiarize yourself with the stages of disposition. We can run a Power Automate flow, so you can customize what happens to labeled items with Power Automate flow to meet specific business requirements, such as moving labeled items to a certain location or sending email notifications. So you can select a flow from ones that may be existing already, and you should also, I think, be able to create new ones from here as well. Actually, no, you can't. I'm wrong about that. You can only select existing ones. So, and I don't have any here. So do be familiar with that. And you can actually deactivate retention settings as well. So labeled items won't be retained or deleted when their retention settings are deactivated. And you'll have to manually remove any items you want deleted. So usually it's going to be one of those top 3 or 4, to be honest. I think the deactivate retention settings is probably the least used of those, but choose which one is most relevant to your needs when setting up your labels and move to the next step. And then you can create your label. Again, I'm not going to do that because I have plenty of labels already in this demo tenant. Now, when you have got your labels created, you can then publish them to the users who are going to use them, and they can view them in their various applications. They can view them in SharePoint and OneDrive content and so on and so forth. So you can publish those labels, and users can then apply them to the content. So then you can choose the labels that you want to publish. So you could just choose these 2 here, for example, and then we go next. We can again apply admin units if we want to. The scope, we can choose whether we want to use an adaptive scope or a static scope. Again, we'll look at adaptive scoping in a moment. So we'll just choose static here for now, where we choose the locations. And what we can do here is we can choose all locations, or we can choose specific locations. So for this example, I will just leave it as all locations. And then you give your policy a name, click next, and then finish after reviewing. And you have published those labels to your users. Nice and simple. So with that in mind, let's go back into data lifecycle management and take a look at Policy Lookup, which is underneath the policies section. If we go into Policy Lookup, what we can do here is that we can find policies that include either a user, a site, or a Microsoft 365 group. You can then enter the exact email address for that user and then search. So let's, for example, put in my email address and click on search. And we can see that there are 2 retention policies that apply to me here. Now, as per the standards that we've just demonstrated on the slide a few moments ago, if one of these policies is more restrictive than the other, then that policy will win. If one of these policies says delete and the other one says retain, the one with retain is going to win. So be very, very certain that you know how this works, but you can't go far wrong if you remember the golden rule that retention always wins over deletion. Now, even after deletion, retained content can be recovered using some tools that are present within Microsoft Purview. These are eDiscovery Premium for things like legal holds and searches, and content search in Purview for compliance, investigations. Retention ensures data is available for regulatory or legal needs. So let's take a look at these in action. If we go down into our solutions, we can see eDiscovery is in here. And I've done videos on eDiscovery before. I believe we may cover this again later in this series. If we don't, then I will be doing a series on eDiscovery again quite soon. So one way or another, this will be covered. But you can see in eDiscovery here, I've got some, well, inventively named cases here when I've just wanted to get on and demonstrate some things. And I've got some content searches there as well. So eDiscovery or eDiscovery Premium, as this is the more advanced of the two features. Content search is basically just a search and export feature. With eDiscovery, you can search, create custodians, you can export, you can redact, all sorts of different things. It's important to know that retention capabilities in Microsoft Purview are not backup and restore type capabilities. They are completely different to that. You can't restore in place. All you can do is use these tools such as eDiscovery and content search to search for and recover and export for analysis the content that you want to look for based on the retention policies that have been in place. So this is how it works. I'm not going to go into the weeds of content search and eDiscovery in this video. It's stuff I've covered before on the channel, will be covering again. Do make sure you're aware of what these tools can do, though, as part of your SC 401 studies and retention policies and labels in particular. Okay, so now we'll talk about adaptive scopes, and these allow you to target policies dynamically based on attributes such as department, geography, or Entra ID properties. To create them or view existing ones, we need to be in Purview and we need to go to Settings. Let's take a look under Roles and Scopes, and here we can see adaptive scopes. We've got a couple created already, so we have the sales department and we've got the marketing department. So we can take a look at these ones and see how they're configured. Let's look at the sales department one. If we click the checkbox there, we can actually edit the scope. So we can't rename it. Once it's named, it is named, but we can change its description if we want to. We can alter the admin units. We can then go and actually we can't change the scope type. We can't actually really do anything with it other than change some of the attributes in here. But you can see here that you can add attributes here. So this is pretty basic. We've got department is equal to sales. So nice and simple, really. So to create a new one, we can create another scope. So let's put in a one called research, which just popped into my head. Again, you would put a good description in here, click on next. You could scope to either the full directory or a specific admin unit who could manage the attributes of these. Click on next, and then we can choose our type of scope here. So 3 types. Users is you'll select Microsoft Entra ID attributes, which are used to define the user, such as first name, last name, and department. You can put specific SharePoint properties in to define sites, such as a site name, a site URL, and refinable strings, or you can do it based on Microsoft 365 groups, where you'll select Microsoft Entra ID attributes to define the groups, such as name, description, and email address. So select whichever one you want. In this case, I'm just going to select users again and click on next. And here we go. We can put in the attribute is equal to, so we can put things like first name, last name, display name, lots of different things here. You can put custom attributes in here also. So you could put department in this case is equal to research is what I had in mind here. So let's just keep this one nice and simple and click submit, and it'll go away and create that for us. So now that we know what adaptive scopes do, we can apply those to either our retention labels or our retention policies, as we saw when we set up our examples a short time ago. Let's just go back and pay a little bit more attention to that now. So we can go ahead and do another new retention policy. Let's just put in that this one is going to be an adaptive scope. And click on next. Again, do always put a good description in and make sure you're choosing your admin units appropriately. So we're going to choose adaptive this time. And here, what we need to do is we need to click on add scopes. And we should see here the adaptive scopes that are available to us. Now, I did create that research one, but it's actually in this other tab here, still spinning and creating. And it can take a little bit of time to create. So I didn't have the patience to wait for it to appear here until I continued recording. So imagine it's there though, and it will indeed be in time. So now I can choose the adaptive policy scope though. So I can go ahead and choose the sales department one. So everybody who has the department attribute of sales will have this retention policy or retention label, if you were to do that as well, apply to them. So you can add that, and then you can go on and choose the locations to apply, click next. Then we can do the usual of setting our retaining or deleting or both settings and click on finish. And it's really as simple as that to create an adaptive scope policy. So to recap, plan retention strategies before implementation, use retention policies for broad coverage and retention labels for granular control. Adaptive scopes equals dynamic targeting as opposed to static. It's important to understand policy precedence and policy lookup capabilities and to know how to recover retained content via eDiscovery and content search. For SC401, do expect scenario-based questions on planning, configuration, and troubleshooting. There you go, that's another one done in this series, SC401. Hope you're enjoying it. If you are, please hit the like button. That helps me so much. Please hit subscribe as well. I am closing in on 15,000 subscribers, and I'd love to get there soon with your help. And that's about it for another video. I'll be back with the next one in the series very, very soon. There's a few more to come in this series just yet. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you on another one very, very soon. In the meantime, you all take care, stay safe, and do travel well. Bye-bye.